The Lost Kingdom of Al-Andalus is proudly sponsored by Andalusian Roots. For more information on guided tours of Islamic Spain, please visit www.islamic-spain.com. Also, please keep listening for a special message after the main story is complete.
The Lost Kingdom of Al-Andalus. Prelude, Paradise Lost. In the southwestern corner of Europe, where Spain and Portugal now reside, there was once a wondrous Islamic civilization called Al-Andalus. She shone brightly with sparkling fountains of pristine water, oceans of fruit-laden trees, vast resources of knowledge and wisdom, and spectacular art and architecture. At the time that Al-Andalus was flourishing, there was no comparison to her beauty in all the world. But the mention of Al-Andalus invokes mixed feelings in the heart of every Muslim. On the one hand, there is great pride in the achievement of the Muslim nation. As the poet Al-Shakundi once said, "Praise be to Allah, who ordained that he who speaks with pride about Al-Andalus may do so without fear, and as boldly as he likes, nor meet any person who may contradict him." But there is also shame and embarrassment. As Muslims, we must confront the truth that although we still recite the Quran on our tongues, we are unable to draw the same inspiration in our hearts that drove the remarkable Andalusians. Al-Andalus is a paradise lost, and we cannot seem to find our way back. In the words of the Andalusian poet Ibn al-Khatib, "Great and powerful we were, wretched we have become. Yesterday we used to feast, today we are feasted upon." It may not be obvious why Muslims long for a return to Al-Andalus, a land where religion and state were not separated, but rather united. Perhaps because the Muslim nation's experience with religion has been very different to that of the Westerner. We were the strongest when we were sincere to Islam, and weakest when we neglected it. This is precisely the opposite experience to that of the West. At the height of Christendom, Europe was in the Dark Ages. Today, the West is more powerful than it has ever been before, and religion has been relegated to a purely personal inclination. But let us now turn to the matter at hand. The story of Al-Andalus is a fantastic tale full of adventure and excitement. It has courageous warriors, epic battles, grand conflicts, tragic love and betrayal, as well as enough plot twists to keep you guessing. There is even a golden tiger for good measure. We begin our story at a critical juncture in the year 750 CE, or 133 after Hijri. Two young men, weary and exhausted, are stumbling towards the banks of the Euphrates. Not far behind are a band of assassins on horseback. Part 1. Birth. Chapter 1. The Falcon has landed. Two young princes flee through the woods towards the river Euphrates. A group of horsemen from the Abbasid clan give chase. The two brothers struggle to catch their breath, stumbling onto the banks of the river. They jump into the waters and begin to swim towards the opposite bank. Their pursuers arrive not long after. One of the Abbasids calls out to fleeing princes, promising not to hurt them if they surrender. Despite the pleas of the older prince, the younger swims back. He clambers out onto dry land, collapsing from exhaustion. The elder prince looks on in horror as his younger brother is slain in front of his eyes. He steels his heart and swims on to safety. Only 19 years old, Abdur Rahman is the only surviving prince of the once powerful Umayyad Empire that stretched from modern-day Pakistan in the east to Spain in the west. Despite the numerous military achievements of the Umayyad kings, there was increasing hostility and discontent against the rulers from within the Muslim Ummah. A rival tribe known as the Abbasids believed that the caliphate was rightfully theirs, as they were direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. The Abbasids were able to garner support for their cause partly due to the increasing gulf between the lifestyle of the common person and that of the Umayyad family. The Umayyads had forsaken their humble desert roots for a life of opulence and decadence, and resorted to repression and brutality against anyone who threatened their extravagant lifestyle. The unity that the Prophet Muhammad had so painstakingly forged began to fragment as pre-Islamic tribal rivalries resurfaced. The revolution against the Umayyads began in Ramadan of 749 CE from modern-day Iraq. Starting as a secret underground movement, the rebels united under the leadership of the Abbasids and overran the capital in Damascus. Their leader, Abul Abbas Abdullah, showed no mercy to his Umayyad cousins. Umayyad men were hunted down and slaughtered. In Damascus, the Abbasids coaxed 80 Umayyad princes into attending a dinner on the pretext of amnesty. When the princes were seated, they were tied with ropes, wrapped in carpets, and bludgeoned to death. Even the bones of Umayyad rulers were dug up and burnt. The bloody Abbasid revolution was complete, and a new chapter in Islamic history had begun. However, the young Umayyad prince, Abdur Rahman, had sensed the dinner invitation was a trap and fled across the border, successfully evading Abbasid assassins. Abdur Rahman was born in 731 CE to Muawiyah II. Following the death of his father at the age of 6, he was raised by his grandfather, Hisham. The recipient of a princely education, the young prince had grown into a tall, rugged, and precociously intelligent man. After crossing the Euphrates, Abdur Rahman walked from village to village, still evading his pursuers and keeping his identity secret, until he reached the coast of Palestine. There he met up with Badr, his trusty valet, and Salim, a freedman of his sister, who had spent time with the great general and conqueror of Spain, Musa ibn Nusair, and was therefore well acquainted with the routes to North Africa. Together, the three men secretly entered Egypt. However, the Abbasids learnt of their movements and gave pursuit once again. Abdur Rahman had no choice but to venture further west until he reached Barca in modern-day Libya, where he sought refuge with the local governor, Ibn Habib. The governor was not interested in swearing allegiance to the Abbasids or the Umayyads. Instead, he was about to declare independence and had already executed some Umayyad princes to make a point. Once again, this time dressed as women, the three men sneaked out and traveled even further west toward Nakur, the home of Abdur Rahman's Berber mother. From the relative security of his Berber kinsfolk, Abdur Rahman began to contemplate his future. Although the young prince had strong ties to the Berbers, he quickly realized that the wild eastern tribes of North Africa were almost impossible to govern. The recently conquered state of Al-Andalus seemed to be the obvious choice for an Umayyad kingdom. Due to Nakur's proximity with the coastal town of Quetta, Abdur Rahman regularly received news of unfolding events in Al-Andalus. Since the departure of Musa ibn Nusair, Al-Andalus had imploded into civil war. Arab tribes were struggling amongst themselves for control of the Berbers that participated in the initial conquest of Al-Andalus under Musa ibn Nusair and Tariq ibn Ziyad. Were revolting after years of Arab oppression. Fighting was so intense that when swords broke, the combatants continued hostilities with sticks, stones, and hand-to-hand scuffles. Even the common folk, such as the butchers and bakers, got involved. The young state was torn by civil unrest and was in dire need of a stabilizing influence. She needed a sense of identity and direction that Abdur Rahman believed he could provide. After a careful study of the internal machinations of Al-Andalus, Abdur Rahman deployed his trustworthy aide and companion, Badr, to harness as much support as possible and pave the way for his arrival. He claimed that as prince of the Umayyad Caliphate, he had a right to rule over the land. Each day, Abdur Rahman would wait patiently by the coast for the arrival of Badr and hope for a new beginning. It was a whole year later that Badr returned. After a warm embrace, Badr related the mixed news. The Umayyads and the Yemenis were looking forward to appointing him as their emir. However, the existing rulers were having no bar of it. It was evident that if Abdur Rahman was to gain sole control, it would have to be by force. On August 14, 755 CE, Abdur Rahman landed at the Spanish port of Almunacar. A year later, he led his new army to victory on the plains of Masara, not far from Córdoba. But he still had to consolidate power. He successfully warded off attacks from an Abbasid fleet, the barbarian Franks of Europe, and more local pretenders to the throne. After weathering the early storm, the Umayyad prince ruled for a further 32 years. In that period, he rebuilt much of the capital, Córdoba. He established the first-ever mosque, which remains to this day as one of the great tourist attractions of Spain, and imported various flora and fauna. Abdur Rahman died in 788 CE. He was a deeply religious man with no interest in worldly pleasures such as alcohol and women. He visited the sick and would always have time to hear the concerns of his subjects. The distinguished Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur once asked his courtiers who deserved the exalted title of Falcon of the Quraysh. When none of his courtiers answered him correctly, he said, "The Falcon of the Quraysh is Abdur Rahman, who escaped by his cunning the spearheads of the lances and the blades of the swords, who after wandering solitary through the deserts of Asia and Africa had the audacity to seek his fortune without an army in lands unknown to him beyond the sea. Having nothing to rely upon, save his own wits and perseverance, he nonetheless humiliated his proud foes, exterminated rebels, organized cities, mobilized armies, secured his frontiers against the Christians, founded a great empire, and reunited under his scepter a realm which seemed already parceled out among others. No man before him ever did such deeds." Before Abdur Rahman died, he tested his 3 sons to gauge not only their intellect, but also their moral stature. His second son, Hisham, surpassed his siblings and was henceforth selected to be his father's successor. Such a choice went against the law and tradition that declared the eldest son must succeed the father. However, Abdur Rahman had made a prudent choice. Hisham was an educated and well-mannered prince who delighted in the company of learned men. In the holy city of Medina, the great Islamic scholar and jurist Imam Malik sat amongst dedicated students that hung on his every word. Some of them had traveled great distances to learn from the esteemed scholar. Amongst them were a few fortunate students from Al-Andalus. After the lesson, Imam Malik, curious and fascinated by the developments of the independent emirate, asked the Andalusians about their nation-state. Their reply included an honorable mention of their emir, Hisham. "He is a saintly man. He attends the prayers 5 times a day at the mosque and encourages others to do so. He is particular about the collection of zakat. During the night, he would steal out, whatever the weather, to deliver food and medicine to the sick and needy." Upon hearing their description, Imam Malik blessed their emir, recognizing his attributes to be those of a model ruler. In 789, Hisham was proclaimed the new emir. Under Hisham there was general peace and stability within the realm, which allowed Al-Andalus to thrive and its religious identity to take shape. After hearing of Imam Malik's esteemed position in the role of Islamic knowledge, and his praises for the Caliph himself, the Umayyads adopted the Maliki school as the official form of state jurisprudence. Largely due to Hisham's influence, knowledge, and scholarship, he acquired great respect and influence in the new Andalus. It is said that Hisham once set a challenge to his courtiers to bring him a book he did not possess in his library, the reward for which would be its weight paid in gold. Part 2, The Golden Years. Chapter 2, Behold Al-Andalus. Europe in the Middle Ages was engulfed in both literal and metaphorical darkness. It was a time of death, disease, tremendous violence, and great suffering born from inequality between the common man and the nobility. 99% of the population was illiterate, and half the population did not live past the age of 21. Cleanliness was widely perceived to be a sin, and even the most renowned cities of Europe lacked basic sanitation. So there was filth and stench in the streets. Human and animal waste was routinely dumped in rivers and streams, rendering most sources of water polluted and unfit to drink. Food was rancid meat and moldy bread. Vegetables were widely perceived to be poisonous. Even clean rainwater was collected for brewing beer rather than drinking. Most housing quarters were very small and uncomfortable. Towns were not constructed with much forethought, so houses were all huddled together around a few very large monolithic structures such as the majestic cathedral and the palace of the king, which, for the royalty of Germany, France, and England, was typically a windowless barn with only a hole in the roof for the exit of smoke. The new Umayyad rulers of Hispania set about building a unique civilization aligned with their Islamic ideals. Al-Andalus would live through a period of stability and prosperity described as a golden age from 756 CE to 1031 CE. For the medieval European, Al-Andalus was a realm of fantasy far beyond what the mind believed to be possible. Muslim engineers and agriculturalists developed intricate systems of irrigation and innovative farming methods to transform the untamed Spanish wilderness into an ocean of olive trees, rice, sugarcane, cotton, ginger, saffron, spinach, and a variety of citrus fruits. The once desolate landscape of Hispania was replaced by panoramic views of fruit-laden trees, expertly manicured gardens, featuring a mosaic of colorful flowers and the soothing sounds of flowing water. Muslim miners extracted copper, gold, silver, tin, lead, iron, quicksilver, and aluminum from the earth. Toledo boasted the finest steel. Almeria, the highest quality sashes famed for their texture and color. Tulala, the best woven carpets, and Granada and Baza, the brightest color in woolen materials. Islamic Cordoba, the capital of the Umayyad dynasty, is now the largest city in all of Europe, boasting 1 million residents. Unlike the small, crowded slums typically found across Europe, Cordoba is a clean city with pristine water gushing down from the mountains through a specially constructed aqueduct. There are sparkling fountains and wide roads paved with stone that survive to this day. At night, Cordobans can walk for 10 miles under the glow of street lamps. Like Cordoba, the Andalusian cities of Seville, Toledo, and Granada have a similar look and feel of their own. At the heart of Cordoba lies the supreme pearl of Umayyad architecture, the Mosque of Cordoba. At its time, it is the third largest mosque behind only the great mosques of Makkah and Medina. The rectangular structure covers over 6 acres of land, built by generations of Umayyad caliphs. Upon entering its enclosure, one is greeted by the open courtyard of oranges, where tall orange and palm trees sway freely. Once inside the mosque proper, the visitor experiences an awe-inspiring spectacle. A forest of pillars of marble, joined together by rows of arches, giving the impression of an unending progression of columns. There is a glittering array of arches and pillars in every direction. Between prayer times, the mosque is packed with hundreds, if not thousands, of circles of learning, devoted to the pursuit of knowledge. Safety, security, and the more equitable distribution of wealth amongst the masses have fueled the people's desires for exotic food, fashion, and entertainment. In contrast to their Christian neighbors that rarely washed or changed their clothes, the Cordobans wear sophisticated seasonal attire. In particular, the women have taken to wearing silk tunics, awash with vivid colors. In private, they indulge in applying makeup, perfume, and experimenting with hairstyles. Personal appearances are fresher and brighter with the introduction of toothpaste, deodorant, and washing powder. Dining has become a sophisticated affair. Meals are served in course. Soup for the entree, followed by the main meal, and then fruit and dessert. Food is more exotic, consisting of boiled rice of incandescent colors, meats of kids and partridges, and sweets such as cookies, lozenges, and a variety of sauces. The fragrant smell of Andalusian cooking comes from saffron, musk, marjoram, and rosewater. Drinks are served not in metal cups, but in crystal goblets. Even the interiors of Cordoban homes are designed with a distinct sense of style. There is a strange game played within the walls named shatranj. It is the precursor to modern-day chess. Al-Andalus was a uniquely tri-religious society where Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisted and cooperated with each other. In the succession of Umayyad caliphs, the long-persecuted Jews of the Iberian Peninsula found powerful protectors and patrons. Jews from all over the diaspora emigrated to Al-Andalus, where they established a flourishing trade and contributed to learning and administration. The Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus gave Jews the right to practice their religion, to manage their own communal affairs, and to even apply their own laws to themselves through their own legal courts. Known as the Bayit Din, the rabbis would play the role of judges and render religious and civil legal opinions and settle disputes. Al-Andalus is both rich in material wealth and powerful in influence. Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a Jewish scholar serving as the foreign minister of the Caliph, describes the might and power of Al-Andalus in a private message to the Jewish community scattered around the world. The name of our land in which we dwell is called in the sacred tongue Sepharad, but in the language of the Arabs, the inhabitants of the land, Al-Andalus. The land is rich, abounding in rivers, springs, and aqueducts, a land of corn, oil, and wine, of fruits and all manners of delicacies. It has pleasure gardens and orchards, fruitful trees of every kind, including the leaves of the tree upon which the silkworm feeds, of which we have great abundance. In the mountains and woods of our country, the cochineal insect is gathered in great quantity. There are also found among us mountain veins of gold, silver, copper, iron, marble, and crystal. Our king has a large collection of gold, silver, and all precious things. Kings from all over the world, to whom his magnificence and power are known, bring gifts, conciliating his favors. Perhaps the crowning achievement of Al-Andalus is the architectural wonder that is part city and part palace named Medina Az-Zahra. Located just 5 kilometers northwest of Cordoba, Medina Az-Zahra took 10 years to build at a staggering cost of 500,000 gold dinars. The complex was built in 961 CE by a workforce of 12,000, with materials imported from as far as Tunisia. The foreign dignitary wishing to pay the king a visit approaches Medina Az-Zahra from a specially constructed road originating from Cordoba. The first sight of Medina Az-Zahra is truly stunning, an enchanting city of dreams, built as 3 terraces, one on top of the other. On the bottom terrace is a fantastically built mosque and the opulent residences of the nobility. Gardens and artificial lakes create a dreamlike atmosphere of peace and tranquility on the middle terrace, and perched on the highest terrace is the royal palace, where the king himself resides. Upon entering through the gates of the city, the visiting delegation believes they have entered paradise on earth. Never in their life has any foreigner witnessed a spectacle such as this. This is a city bursting with life, with sights and sounds of running waters and luxuriant gardens, Throngs of soldiers, pages, eunuchs, and servants from diverse nations and religions, all sumptuously attired in robes of silk and brocade, moving back and forth across its broad streets, judges, administrators, poets, and theologians walking through the halls and courts. There is a massive statue of a tiger with golden eyes. Water pours from the tiger's mouth into a large reservoir. There is an aviary of rare birds, and a small zoo visible from another section of the city. There are also aquariums almost everywhere. Inside a city hall, the visitors notice the ceilings and walls are embellished with panels of crystal, ivory, and ebony, studded with precious stones. Its doors are flanked with pillars of marble and crystal. Ornate carpets cover the floor and decorate the ceilings. And once the delegation has had time to absorb this spectacle, it is time to move on to the next. In the middle of the next hall, there is a basin in which water falls from golden statues of a lion, an antelope, a crocodile, an eagle, and a duck. A basin of quicksilver in the center lights up, creating a dazzling array of reflections. Further along from the second hall is a patio overlooking a pond filled with lilies. Incredibly, the lilies open up, exposing pieces of gold and silver, which are then fetched by the servants and presented as gifts to the delegation. Another lengthy wait, but there is no imposition, as the members of the delegation remain transfixed on the vision before them. The king's chamber is near. The delegation is finally brought before the caliph. He reclines alone on a richly decorated couch. Behold, Abdur-Rahman III, the Caliph of the Muslims and of all the people of Al-Andalus. Chapter 3. An Insatiable Hunger for Knowledge. The year 999 has sparked fear amongst Christian Europe that the end of the world is near. The old Basilica of St. Peter in Rome is packed on New Year's Eve for what is expected to be the final Mass in history. The Mass is led by Pope Sylvester II, who is rumored to delve in black magic. The rumors have been sparked by the Pope's newly acquired ability to do basic arithmetic. His audience is both impressed and horrified by his ability to use magical symbols to conduct difficult calculations in little time. They accuse him of acquiring this dark art from Muslim Spain. In fact, there is some truth to the rumors. During his early childhood, the Pope was raised in monasteries in the Spanish Pyrenees. These monasteries held books acquired from Muslim Spain that were translated into Latin. It is through these books that the future Pope learned how to use the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, a series of 9 figures to replace the cumbersome and ungainly Roman numeral system. The number 434, which would take 9 Roman numerals to write, now took 3. However, Europe was not ready for such sorcery, and the Pope was eventually removed and exiled. In Al-Andalus, another Umayyad has risen to the throne. Like his predecessors, Abdur-Rahman III has deep blue eyes and long flowing golden hair. But this handsome young man has taken the extraordinary step of declaring himself Caliph of all the Muslims. This is not a claim to be taken lightly, for it challenges both the Abbasids of Baghdad and the Fatimids of North Africa for leadership of the Muslim nation. Like his great-grandfather of the same name, Abdur-Rahman III had to deal with internal uprisings, as well as the militant northern Christian kingdoms. There was also a new threat emerging in North Africa. Across the Straits of Gibraltar, the Fatimids had subdued almost all of North Africa, and now were looking to expand into the Iberian Peninsula. The Fatimids were an Ismaili branch of the Shiite sect, who believed that the succession of power after the Prophet should have gone to his family. Political differences aside, the Ismailis had evolved an objectionable and heretical creed over the years. Abdur-Rahman III managed to resist their threat and played a role in driving them out of northwest Africa. The Fatimids eventually settled in Cairo, where they continued to pursue their aspirations to dethrone the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad in vain. Finally, Salahuddin would bring about an end to their empire in the 1160s. With all threats subdued and abundant wealth at his disposal, Abdur-Rahman III now began to fashion a new and powerful kingdom. For long periods, Cordoba was mimicking and playing catch-up to Baghdad. It was now time for a new era, a time for the Andalusians to stamp their own identity in the course of history, and to be a worthy rival not only to Baghdad, but to any civilization on the face of the earth. Abdul-Rahman III was passionate about the religious and secular sciences. Sparing no expense, he imported books from Baghdad and attracted the leading scholars from the Muslim world with enormous incentives. A network of schools, libraries, hospitals, research centers, and institutions of Islamic sciences were developed. Toledo became the cradle of learning and a point of interaction between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. European scholars traveled to Al-Andalus to learn Arabic and translate Arabic manuscripts into Latin. In that era, aspiring scholars wishing to pursue any branch of learning had to be proficient in Arabic. Abdur-Rahman III's love for books would only be superseded by his son, Al-Hakam, who retained 400,000 books, the largest collection to be found in Europe. His agents brought back books from markets in every corner of the world. The relationship between knowledge and Al-Andalus was such that the respect paid to individuals was judged by the size of their personal library. It is said that once a man traded 120 acres of land for just one book. Professor Reinhard Dozy, an authority on Moorish history, claimed that even a boy begging on the streets of Al-Andalus could read and write, while in Europe, even the kings and noblemen remained illiterate. Muslim scholars and scientists would invent and refine the sciences of medicine, chemistry, mathematics, physics, surgery, astronomy, and the arts. According to Professor Thomas Arnold and Adam Smith, the father of modern-day capitalism, it would be from this platform that Europe would propel itself into the Renaissance. Al-Andalus gave birth to a vast number of scientists and philosophers that excelled in a range of fields including medicine, mathematics, astronomy, botany, and agriculture. Al-Zahrawi, Ibn Tufail, Ibn Rushd, and the Jewish physician Maimonides authored the most advanced medical treatises of the time. Al-Batruji developed a theory of the movement of stars, while Al-Zarqali compiled highly accurate astronomical data that gave the positions of planets and developed innovative instruments, such as a water clock that could tell the hours of the day and night. Among the pioneers in agriculture was Ibn al-Awam, whose Book of Agriculture is perhaps the most significant work in medieval times. The treatise spans 34 chapters on diverse topics, such as agriculture, animal husbandry, cultivation of plants and trees, and remedies for plant diseases, as well as the discovery of a new soil science. Andalusian scientists were particularly known for the identification and classification of natural phenomena. Al-Ghafiqi was renowned for collecting and naming plants in Arabic, Latin, and Berber. Ibn al-Baytar was perhaps the greatest pharmacist of medieval times. He identified and described over 1,400 medical drugs in a distinguished encyclopedic work. The Golden Age of Al-Andalus was also the Golden Age for Jews. In this period, Jewish intellectual development resulted in contributions to mathematics, medicine, botany, geography, poetry, and philosophy. Jews also translated Arabic texts into an array of other languages. Among the most prominent Jews was Musa ibn Maimun, or Maimonides, the greatest of the Spanish Jewish thinkers. Maimonides is known for his contributions to medicine, philosophy, and astronomy. Fluent in Arabic, Hebrew, and Spanish, he made his first contributions in Spain, but then moved to North Africa, where he served in the Egyptian court under a succession of rulers, including Salahuddin. There are many intriguing stories of Andalusian scientists. Of these, The story of the Muslim astronomer Ibn Firnas is particularly interesting. It was almost 23 years ago that Ibn Firnas, hidden amongst a crowd outside the Mosque of Cordoba, witnessed an extraordinary event. A young man stood in the elevated balcony where the call to prayer is made 5 times a day. He wears a strange contraption made of silk and wooden rods. Coaxed by a chanting crowd growing weary of the long wait, he spreads his arms and jumps off his perch. To Ibn Firnas's amazement, rather than plummeting to the ground like a rock, the young stuntman swoops down more like a bird as the contraption on his back partially inflates from the rushing wind. Ibn Firnas is suitably impressed. An accomplished scientist, he has considerable knowledge in astronomy, mechanical devices, and in the qualities of both glass and crystal. In time, he will discover how to create glass crystal from sand, from which he will develop amazing inventions, such as the drinking glass, corrective optical lenses, and glass planispheres. But Ibn Firnas acknowledges that he has no knowledge of aeronautics. Can he, one day, fly like a free bird in the sky? The mere prospect is irresistible. Intermittently, over the following years, Ibn Firnas studies the flight of birds and the motion of their wings until he builds his own from silk, wood, and actual feathers. Finally, at the age of 70, and at the twilight of his life, he stands on the top of a mountain with crowds of colleagues and onlookers staring at his distant figure with bated breath. Ibn Firnas studies the wind. It is stronger than what he would have liked. He knows that a strong wind may lift him higher and further, but it might also disrupt his flight as well. He waits for the wind to settle, and then, with a short run, he jumps off the cliff. The crowd reacts with shock as Ibn Firnas defies gravity and begins to glide. For what may have been 10 minutes, the crowd gapes at his figure while he circles in the air. Ibn Firnas has achieved his ambition to fly in the heavens like the birds. He can see the expanse of the earth, the wind howling in his ears. But as he descends towards the ground, an awful realization dawns upon him. He is approaching at an incredible speed that he cannot control. All these years he has been so obsessed with flying that he had not given any thought to landing. This oversight can cost him his life. Ibn Firnas hits the ground with such speed and impact that he tumbles head over heels repeatedly and blacks out. When he regains his consciousness, he thanks Allah that he is not dead, but he feels a sharp pain in his back that he will carry for the remaining 12 years of his life. Over these years, Ibn Firnas will come to realize that he had failed to recognize a key component essential to the flight of birds. Their tails provide both balance and control, which, when used together with the feet and wings, allow birds to slow their speed almost to a halt just above the ground. The pain in his back reminds him to be diligent in his future scientific endeavors. Like Ibn Firnas, Al-Zahrawi has made extraordinary contributions to modern science, particularly in the area of medicine. Known in the West as Abu Qasis, Al-Zahrawi was born in 936, not far from Cordoba. He was a descendant of the Ansar tribe of Arabia, who had settled earlier in Spain. Recognized by many as the father of modern surgery, Al-Zahrawi was also an expert in obstetrics, dentistry, and pharmaceutical sciences. He remarkably sketched 200 medical instruments, many of which he designed with his own hand, and have been used up to 1,000 years thereafter. His outstanding contribution to medicine is the Kitab al-Tasrif, or Method of Medicine, a 30-volume encyclopedia of medical practices completed about 1000 CE, the result of almost 50 years of medical practice and experience. Al-Zahrawi wrote in his book, "Whatever skill I have derived for myself by my long reading of the books of the ancients, and my thirst to understand them, until I extracted the knowledge of it from them. Then, through the whole of my life, I have adhered to experience and practice. I have made it accessible for you and rescued it from the abyss of verbosity." The following account depicts a typical day in Medina az-Zahra, where al-Zahrawi would perform complex and delicate operations. In the year 1005, an expecting mother is unable to deliver her baby because of a serious complication that is unlikely to see both mother and son survive. The baby cannot pass through the birth canal in the position he is in. Al-Zahrawi sweats profusely. He recognizes the delicate nature of the predicament. He reaches into his surgical bag to retrieve a medical instrument he designed and engineered 50 years ago when he was a young doctor. It is a pair of forceps that he will use to perform the necessary but excruciatingly painful maneuver. Fortunately, the operation is successful, and Al-Zahrawi places the screaming child into his mother's arms. Al-Zahrawi's next appointment is an elderly lady suffering from severe bloating. After his nurse prepares the lady with the necessary sedative and anesthetic, Al-Zahrawi uses a piece of black coal to draw the lines where he will make the necessary incisions, and then retrieves another of his inventions, a scalpel, with which he will cut through the skin and remove the excess tissue. He sutures the incisions to complete the operation and then advises on remedies to reduce blood loss and expedite the lady's recovery. The next appointment is a general checkup to see whether the dentures he designed for one of the caliph's aging servants is performing as expected. He then visits an advisor to the caliph suffering from kidney stones. This is another challenging procedure for which Al-Zahrawi has designed a particularly ingenious instrument. The patient must be tied down and sedated for the instrument to be effective. Al-Zahrawi expertly slips an extremely thin wire made of silver, capped with a diamond, into the patient's urethra. Using his sense of touch, Al-Zahrawi guides the wire to the stone. The stone disintegrates on contact with the diamond tip, instantly releasing the pressure in the patient. Al-Zahrawi is humbled by the gold coins thrust towards him. His final visit is his most difficult venture of the day. One of the caliph's guards was unfortunately thrown off his horse onto a stone wall and can no longer move his legs. After the customary greeting, the doctor asks, "How do you feel?" The man indicates there has been no improvement. He motions with his chin towards his lower body, asking, "Will I ever regain movement here?" Al-Zahrawi chooses his words carefully. Though nothing is impossible in creation, this humble servant has never seen such an injury repair itself. The guard is silent for a time before he allows tears to trickle down his cheek. Al-Zahrawi continues, "I found no such break in your spine, which was remarkable considering your fall. I checked each vertebrae. I found no trauma there. What I did find was a powerful blow to this point, at the medulla oblongata, where your spinal cord passes into the brain. I've performed several investigations in my time on those who were paralyzed like you, but without spinal injury. In their cases, I found that the area at the base of their brain was severely injured, either cutting or impeding the flow from the brain to the spine. This kind of damage to the brain and nerve is beyond my ability to suture and repair. For now, it is irreparable to human hands." The guard cannot conceal his sorrow. "I had thought if anyone on earth could save me, it would be you," he confesses. "That any one of us even make it through the birth canal, much less live a life, is a miracle," says Al-Zahrawi softly. "I have spent all my years trying to extend that miracle to as many as I can." The soldier acknowledges Al-Zahrawi is the greatest physician in the world. Al-Zahrawi's vast achievements are difficult to enumerate. He was the first to describe the condition of hemophilia and the condition of hydrocephalus, or water on the brain. He was the first to give effective therapy for heart disease, constipation, and prescribe measurements of drug quantities. He also explained how to cauterize and treat wounds, set broken bones in the case of simple and compound fractures, remove projectiles like arrows embedded in the human body, and widen urinary tracts experiencing blockage. He even described how to amputate limbs without killing the amputee, and his work in dentistry was groundbreaking. And yet, Despite these incredible achievements, he felt ashamed that he could not do anything for this champion warrior. With heartfelt sorrow, al-Zahrawi recognized that the patient would have to accept his fate and contend with the consequences. Unfortunately, there is very little known today about al-Zahrawi, as the magnificent city of Medina az-Zahra, where he spent most of his life, was devastated by foreign invaders. The only surviving record of his work is his handwritten treatise, The Method of Medicine, which was discovered by a discerning Italian monk who imagined it might be of use to the Christians of the North. Due to the complexity and sophistication of this single work, it will take 300 years for the Europeans to translate it in its entirety. Zahrawi's contributions still have a profound impact on the way medicine is practiced today. Part 3. The Struggle. Chapter 4. Decadence and Division. Medina az-Zahra was a symbol of architectural achievement on the one hand, but also of overindulgence and excess on the other. The religious men of Córdoba openly chastised and even wept at such squandering of wealth. Ibn Shuhayd addresses Medina az-Zahra directly. I am sadly affected by the death which has befallen you. But was it not divine justice, since during your life you were so endlessly proud of your own splendor? The caliphs became increasingly distant from their own people, and were rarely to be seen amongst them. Music and alcohol were now commonplace, especially amongst the elite, and the quest for personal power and wealth replaced the desire to propagate Islam beyond the realm. It was time for Al-Andalus to heed the warning of the Prophet Muhammad to the nation of Islam. By Allah, I do not fear poverty for you, but I fear that this world will be opened up for you, just as it was for those before you. So you will compete with one another for it, as they competed for it, and it will destroy you as it destroyed them. For a brief period of time, Al-Andalus was governed by someone other than an Umayyad. Al-Mansur came to power towards the end of the first millennium. The Umayyad Caliph at that time, Hisham, was more than happy for Al-Mansur to act as the regent while he attended to the pleasures of life. The rule of Al-Mansur was generally prosperous. He ran a disciplined administration and conducted regular sorties to keep the northern Christians subdued. Although he never claimed the position of caliph for himself, it was clear that he pulled all the strings. The death of Al-Mansur brought his son Sancho to the helm. Sancho had even greater political ambitions than his father, but had much less competence. More troubling than his poor political skills was his condescending attitude toward Islam. Once, he was sitting amongst his friends and servants when he heard the adhan, the call to prayer. Annoyed by the interruption, Sancho remarked, "How I wish this man would call to drinking instead." Sancho forced Hisham to abdicate the position of caliph for himself, and with it he initiated the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate. A bloody civil war ensued. The Umayyads fought each other along with the Berbers and Slavs, each vying to place their chosen leader in power. However, it was the Christians in the north of the continent that would prove to be their most potent enemy. Since the conquest of Visigothic Spain in 711, the majority of Christians recognized the state of Al-Andalus. They chose to live either under Islamic rule or enter into treaties allowing them to keep their estates. However, an unhappy minority refused to accept the new state of affairs and had migrated to the northern Christian realms. Of this minority, one group of fanatical Christians refused to submit to the infidel. They had retreated to the Cantabrian mountains along with their religious books and artifacts. Led by the Gothic dignitary Pelayo, they organized themselves into a resistance unit. Initially, Muslim commanders paid little attention to the guerrilla warriors, choosing to concentrate their efforts beyond the Pyrenees into France. Over time, Pelayo's resistance unit grew larger and bolder. They exploited intermittent conflict within Al-Andalus to gain territory patiently, piece by piece. Between periods of peace and stability, there were internal struggles for power. Over generations, while the Muslims were distracted, the Christian renegades gradually transformed into a formidable foe. By the time Hisham's father, Abdur-Rahman, took the reins of power, the rebels had formed the Kingdom of Asturia, sprawling over 1/5 of the land of Al-Andalus. But Abdur-Rahman decided it was best to sort out his own house before tending to the threat in the north. He focused his resources into warding off one internal threat after another, leaving the Asturians largely untouched during his reign. When Hisham succeeded his father, he made a concerted effort to dislodge the Kingdom of Asturia from the north. Troops from Córdoba and the northern states defeated the Asturians in a major battle, gaining much booty, but not territory. However, the Christian kingdom remained obdurate. They had taken a battering, but they had survived. The current civil war gave the Christians an opportunity to dominate the political landscape for the first time. Muslim emirs, locked in conflict with each other, tried to build alliances with the Christians to strengthen their own hand. Delegations were sent to northern Christians to offer incentives to join the fight. The Christians agreed without hesitation, but asked for large sums of money and strategically important territory in return. Forts that were resolutely defended by the Muslims for centuries were now eagerly handed over to the Christians. Mosques were sprinkled with wine and converted to churches, and yet the Muslims did not pause the bloodletting to consider the long-term implications of their actions. In November 1010 CE, hordes of Berbers ransacked and destroyed Medina az-Zahra, stripping everything of value and leaving it to burn. The Palace of Dreams would never be inhabited again and remains today in a state of ruin. The Umayyad Caliphate fell in 1031 CE, splintering Al-Andalus into 30 principalities or taifas of varying sizes. 4 major taifas emerged: Saragossa in the northeast, Toledo in the center, Seville in the south, and Badajoz in the east. Although the fragmentation of Al-Andalus was political suicide for the Muslims, it wasn't perceived as such at the time. The Muslims were confident of their civilization. They saw the northern Christians as no better than barbarians that posed little threat. To them, their co-religionists were the bigger problems that needed to be subdued, at times ruthlessly, and with the help of the Christians, if required. While the Muslims were being further divided, the Christians were unifying. The kingdoms of Castile and Leon merged after King Fernando married the Princess of Leon. Fernando, now sensing their weakness, attacked all the major kingdoms, quickly subduing them. A number of taifas suffered the humiliation of being forced to pay large sums of money as a tribute to Fernando, and yet they continued to fight each other, unabated. Although the taifas fought each other, the Islamic Andalusian civilization continued to flourish as rival rulers competed in poetic and scholarly pursuits. These rulers were great writers, poets, and brilliant mathematicians. After Fernando's death, the Christians began an internal conflict of their own. One of Fernando's sons, Alfonso, was imprisoned but managed to negotiate exile into Toledo, where he was treated like a prince. Alfonso enjoyed 9 months of royal treatment. However, his expression of gratitude was to show his crusading spirit against the Muslims when he eventually came into power. In 1085, Alfonso was at the gates of Toledo, where he starved the city into submission. The Christians gathered at the main mosque in order to convert it into a church. The Muslims completed their congregational prayer, and then at the instruction of their imam, read verses of the Holy Koran, after which they prostrated and left the mosque in tears. Ibn Ghazal captures the sentiment of the Muslims in these verses. O people of Al-Andalus, spur your mounts, for our place here is but a deception. The fabric of the peninsula is unraveling from the edges, and the cloth even unravels from the center. We are in the midst of enemies we cannot get rid of. What kind of life is this, living in a basket of vipers? Toledo was lost, a dagger buried deep in the heart of Al-Andalus. Chapter 5. Mu'tamid's Dilemma. The historian Al-Marakushi once wrote, "If one wanted to list all the examples of beauty produced by Al-Andalus from the time of the conquest to the present day, then Al-Mu'tamid would be one of them, if not the greatest of all." Al-Mu'tamid was the king of Seville, the most powerful and artistically gifted city-state in all of Andalus. He used to frequent the banks of Al-Wadi al-Kabir, known as Guadalquivir today. There he once spied a light wind pluck at the surface of the shining water, so that it broke into 1,000 points of fire, glittering like a coat of mail in the sunlight. Inspired by the spectacle, Al-Mu'tamid improvised a half-verse in Arabic, challenging his close friend Ibn Amar to complete it. "Behold, a breastplate welded by the breeze." A renowned poet, Ibn Amar would rarely miss a challenge, but this time he hesitated, humming and hawing to buy time. Along the banks of a river came a reply. "A fit for a warrior, would it freeze?" The voice was that of a beautiful young woman washing linen by the river. Al-Mu'tamid had the young lady brought to his palace, where he purchased her freedom and married her. Her name was Itimad, which meant reliance, which spurred the young prince to name himself Al-Mu'tamid, or the one who relies on Allah. Al-Mu'tamid became infatuated with his bride. He found it difficult to bear even short periods of separation from her, as is evidenced in his numerous romantic poems. Among his bride's many whims and desires was the sight of snowflakes falling from the winter sky. To please her, Mu'tamid had thick almond trees planted in the Sierra of Cordoba. In spring, the trees would shed their delicate white blossoms into the air. Spring would be transformed into winter, and Itimad would be pleased once again. Although Mu'tamid was a romantic at heart, he was also a competent general and a fierce warrior. He succeeded in adding Cordoba to the kingdom of Seville, which he commemorated with verses that combine his warrior and romantic spirits. "I have won at the first onset the hand of the lovely Cordoba, that brave Amazon who with sword and spear repelled all those who sought her in marriage, and now we celebrate our nuptials in her palace, while the other monarchs, my baffled rivals, weep tears of rage and tremble with fear. With good reason do ye tremble, despicable foemen, for soon will the lion spring upon you." Al-Mu'tamid's life blossomed for the first 4 or 5 years after the conquest of Cordoba. But the rampaging forces of Alfonso VI quickly transformed his paradise into a living nightmare. Alfonso was now clearly the most powerful leader in the Iberian Peninsula. The Christian king had placed his soldiers in each Muslim army. He also wove an intricate web of spies across the various courts of the Muslim taifas. It is said that he crushed the treasuries of the Muslim kinglets, as in a winepress, till they poured forth gold. Christian soldiers raped Muslim women, murdered Muslim children, and sold the prisoners for a pittance. If a prisoner was unable to pay his own ransom, they would cut out his tongue, put out his eyes, and cause him to be torn by vicious dogs. Matters came to a head when Alfonso demanded his pregnant wife be accommodated in one of Al-Mu'tamid's palaces, and that her delivery take place in the mosque of Cordoba. Al-Mu'tamid could no longer bear the humiliation. 1085 CE. A council is convened upon the darkest hour in the history of Al-Andalus. An increasingly desperate group of Muslim emirs, qadis, and scholars gathered to contemplate the metaphorical writing on the wall. No single taifa is strong enough to confront Alfonso. The hearts of the emirs are so divided, and the mutual hatred runs so deep, that a unified response is impossible. There appears to be no way to rescue Al-Andalus from certain annihilation. Or is there? Apparently, Mu'tamid knows a way. There is an army of veiled warriors in the northwestern part of Africa, known as the Murabitun. They are led by an eminent Islamic scholar named Yusuf ibn Tashfin. This army can overcome the Crusaders with Allah's will. The council is divided on the prospect of inviting a foreign power. If Yusuf ibn Tashfin and his Murabitun warriors enter Al-Andalus and defeat Alfonso, then they will be too powerful for the Andalusians to resist and may take power for themselves. This is the very same dilemma that has divided the Muslims throughout their history. When the time comes to confront the enemy of Islam, the Muslims in authority are unable to put aside their differences, instead seeking self-preservation, even if it were for a short term. Ironically, it is this very instinct of self-preservation that seals their fate in the longer term. As the most powerful Muslim leader in Al-Andalus, Al-Mu'tamid has the final say. He emerges from a bout of deep contemplation with words that are both eloquent and wise. I have no desire to be branded by my descendants as the man who delivered Al-Andalus as prey to the infidels. I am loath to have my name cursed in every Muslim pulpit. As for my part, I would rather be a camel driver in Africa than a swineherd in Castile. By these words, Al-Mu'tamid raises Islam above his own self-interest, recognizing that if his destiny must be servitude, then he would rather it is to Islam than Christianity. Chapter 6. Veiled Warriors from the Desert. Even in his 70s, the scholar Yusuf ibn Tashfin was a formidable warrior and a military strategist. He was a thin man of medium height with a soft voice, dark eyes and dark hair, and a brownish complexion. Unlike Al-Mu'tamid, Yusuf was raised a nomad amongst sand dunes, palm trees, and camels. He had forsworn even the simplest luxuries of life. His diet consisted of barley, meat, and camel milk. He dressed exclusively in black clothes made of wool, choosing to draw a veil over his face in the manner of desert tribes, a symbol of modesty. Yusuf was the leader of the Murabitun, a powerful new Islamic movement that aimed to purify the people of North Africa. Even as the leader of the Murabitun, Yusuf's palace was a tent made of camel hair. What Yusuf lacked in material wealth, he made up in superior intellect and spirituality. The historians described him as a man of enormous energy, fueled by the nomadic spirit. He was both brave and devout, and possessed a remarkable intellect and clarity of vision. Ibn Tashfin was a humble man, merciful to his fellow men. He had a profound respect for Islamic knowledge and law, which compelled him to treat Islamic jurists with respect, to apply their advice to the best of his ability. When Ibn Tashfin received Al-Mu'tamid's request for assistance in combating the Crusaders, he replied, I am the first to be entrusted to come to the assistance of this faith, and none other than I myself will take charge of this matter. Yusuf set sail for Al-Andalus with a large army consisting of at least 7,000 cavalry and a great number of foot soldiers. Al-Mu'tamid greeted the army with gifts, suggesting the army rest a few days before beginning preparations for war. Yusuf refused, saying, I have only come with the aim of fighting holy war against the enemy. Wherever he is, I will set off to face him. Alfonso was laying siege to a Muslim castle when news of the Murabitun's landing came to him. He immediately broke off the siege and returned to his lands to raise an army for what was going to be a decisive battle to determine whether Islam or Christianity would rule Spain. The two armies faced each other on the plains of Zalaka, their camps 3 miles apart. Alfonso had amassed the largest force in the history of Al-Andalus against the Muslim alliance.
كم تحلو في الدرب الآلام بجلالك تصطبغ الأحلام تتفتق بالوعي الأفهام وتعانق طلعتك الأيام من أجلك يا فجر الإسلام من أجلك يا فجر الإسلام.
Ibn Tashfin offered the customary 3 choices to Alfonso: accept Islam, pay tribute, or war. Alfonso replied with disdain, How can he send me such a letter when my father and I have imposed tribute on the people of his religion for the past 80 years? Alfonso's priests roared and chanted, raising their crosses and Bibles high. Alfonso said, "Friday is your holy day. Saturday is the Jews. They are our ministers and scribes and make up the majority of the servants in the army, and we cannot do without them. Sunday is our holy day, so Monday would be the best day to begin operations." It is Friday, the 23rd of October in 1086, and Yusuf ibn Tashfin is heading out for the early morning Fajr prayer when he sees Al-Muqtamid in the distance galloping towards him. Muqtamid isn't dressed for prayer, but for battle. He is armed to the teeth and has something to say. "Pray at the head of your men. I am ill at ease today. I am here behind you, for I suspect this pig has a secret design to launch a sudden attack on the Muslims." Yusuf takes his position at the head of the congregation and raises his hands to begin the prayer. As he is about to begin the second rak'ah, the Christian cavalry bursts into the open, led by Alfonso himself. Like lightning, they charge towards the Muslim congregation. With battle cries sounding around them, the Murabitun pick up their weapons and mount their horses. The Muslim army hastily organizes itself into 3 blocks. The front line consists of Andalusian troops. In the center is the Murabit cavalry from Morocco, Mauritania, and Senegal. The back line consists of elite African infantry, armed with Indian swords and long javelins. Al-Muqtamid's Andalusian troops bear the brunt of the cavalry assault. They take significant losses, but are able to hold their line. With the Castilians engaged in a heated battle with the front line, Yusuf launches a flanking attack. The Murabit center go around their own front line, charging past the Christian army towards the Christian camp. The Muslim cavalry set the camp alight and then turn around and charge towards the rear of the Castilian army. The Christians are sandwiched between the Andalusians and the Murabitun. Yusuf directs a final flanking attack. The African infantry emerge from the back line to attack the side of the Christians, completing the rout. The Christian army is decimated, and Alfonso manages to escape, although he is severely wounded. Yusuf is disgusted by the way the Andalusian emirs quarrel over the war booty, which he himself did not touch. Following the battle, he witnessed firsthand the lavish and frivolous lifestyle of the emirs. He is far from impressed. As promised, Ibn Tashfin leaves Al-Andalus only to return as Alfonso has regrouped. This time, the Murabitun fight on their own. None of the emirs offer any help. It is an act of treachery that Yusuf will not forgive. In 1090 CE, Yusuf crossed over for a third time and removed all the emirs, thus incorporating Al-Andalus into the Murabitun Empire. Al-Muqtamid was deported to North Africa with his family. There, in the arid desert of a village near Marrakesh, he lived destitute, penniless, and tormented by the sight of his beloved Itimad and his daughters spinning wool for paltry sums. Perhaps it was the death of his beloved Itimad that extinguished his desire to live. In 1095, overwhelmed by grief, he died in exile, the last of the great kings of Al-Andalus. Meanwhile, the Murabitun caused a religious upsurge during a time of corruption and moral laxity in Muslim Spain. They ruled for a century, driving the Christian knights beyond the Pyrenees. Islamic practices flourished once again. Al-Andalus was given a new lease of life. Chapter 7. Granada, the last bastion. The year is 1377 CE. All that is left of Al-Andalus is a small piece of land in the south, with its back against the Straits of Gibraltar. The Murabitun were succeeded by a rival tribe known as the Muwahhidun, but they too are no longer. North African tribes have annexed a large portion of Spain for their empire, which has lasted for close to 2 centuries. However, once they fell, the Christians picked off Córdoba, Valencia, and then Seville. Although the last of the Crusades has come to pass in the Middle East, its Spanish equivalent, known as the Reconquista, is in full force. This time, there is no Salahuddin-like figure to turn the tide, and yet the tiny kingdom of Granada has held out for the last century. Ibn Ahmar established the kingdom of Granada in 1237 in the wake of the collapse of the Muwahhidun. Although he managed to preserve the kingdom, he did so using dishonorable means. Instead of building alliances with the other Muslim princes against the now unified Christian kingdom, he chose to become a slave to King Ferdinand. Ibn Ahmar paid Ferdinand exorbitant tributes and agreed to fight alongside him against his fellow Muslim princes. Granada survived for 2 centuries. Although small in size, Granada had a strong economic foundation drawn from industry and agriculture. She was renowned for her picturesque scenery and her markets that attracted merchants from all over the world. A well-educated citizenry, the cleanest environment in all of Europe, and honest and entrepreneurial local traders made Granada one of the most affluent states in the Mediterranean. The courts of Granada, however, painted a much bleaker picture. The same debilitating Andalusian politics had infected Granada as well. Powerful families and a host of pretenders vied for the throne without scruples and without consideration for Islamic morals. The administration was rotting from within due to mutual jealousies, intrigues, and conspiracies. It was wife against husband, son against father, brother against brother, nephew against uncle. No family relation was sanctified, and the assassin's dagger was in frequent use. Yet Granada survived, and her leaders even planned a campaign of expansion. However, events unfolding in the Christian north would herald the beginning of the end. In 1479 CE, the union of King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile largely united Christian Spain. They believed it was their religious duty to rid Spain of the last traces of Islam. Isabella had made the commitment to continue the Crusades against the Muslims a condition of her marriage. Although the Christian military was more powerful than anything the Granadians could muster, the battle was far from one-sided. The Granadians were mountain warriors, experienced in trapping and ambushing their enemies through mountain passes. They were particularly adept at using their natural environment, such as orchards and irrigation ditches, to hamper the enemy's heavy cavalry. Ferdinand claimed the city of Al-Hamah, but his armies suffered great losses at Loja and Malaga. The Spanish king was clearly demoralized, but found cause for renewed hope due to another twist in the political affairs of the Muslims. At a most inopportune moment, a revolution broke out in the kingdom of Granada. The king, Hassan Ali, had to deal with a challenger to his throne that happened to be his own son, Abu Abdullah, known as Boabdil among the Spanish. Civil strife broke out as the city was fractured into 2. Eventually, Hassan Ali retreated to Malaga, leaving his son in power and a city languishing with 2 kings. Ferdinand managed to capture Abu Abdullah, but cunningly released him so that the civil war could continue between father and son and to hasten the demise of the last vestige of Islamic Iberia. Abu Abdullah agreed to pay a tribute to Ferdinand and accepted to be his vassal. The King of Aragon and Castile began the final onslaught on Muslim territory. The Christians conquered, pillaged, and destroyed their way to the gates of Granada. Although Abu Abdullah had bought some time by betraying his father and stabbing his relations in the back, that time was up. No help came from the Ottomans, the Mamluks, or the Sultans of North Africa. The final battle of the Spanish Crusade was about to be written. The year was 1491. Chapter 8. The Last Sigh of the Moor. From every corner of Europe they came, warriors eager to take part in the last of the Spanish Crusades. They called the camp where they prepared Santa Fe, or Holy City, to mark the significance of the final battle. Queen Isabella had sold her jewelry to fund the campaign. It had been a very long wait, almost 8 centuries since Spain had been under the cross. Ferdinand ordered Abu Abdullah to vacate Granada as he laid siege to the city. Within the walls of the city there was outrage directed at the king. Surrender was not an option. The city would go down fighting to the last man. The resistance was led by Musa ibn Ghassan, a renowned warrior of royal lineage. The protracted siege was often punctuated by a series of duels between the cavalry. On almost every occasion, Musa and his men would rout their opponents, leading Ferdinand to forbid his knights from accepting further challenges. But Abu Abdullah was not interested in a drawn-out battle. He secretly organized a meeting with Ferdinand to arrange terms for surrender. His minister returned with a draft of the treaty that promised to allow Muslims to keep their property, to release all prisoners of war, and to have complete freedom for the Muslims to practice their faith. The call to prayer, or adhan, would be called as per normal, and Christians would be forbidden to enter mosques, and so the list went on. The treaty was finalized by a pledge by both Ferdinand and Isabella. We ensure, promise, and swear by our faith and royal word that we shall observe and make observed everything herein contained, everything and every part, now and hereafter, now and forever. When the terms of surrender were read out to Abu Abdullah, only Musa voiced his objection. "Do not deceive yourselves. These Christians are thirsting for your blood. Death is the least of the evils that menace you. More fearful are the torments and humiliations that our inimical fortune is preparing us for. The plunder, the sack of our houses, the desecration of our mosques, the outrage and degradation of our wives and daughters, all these things we shall see with our eyes. By Allah, I will not see them." There was no reply, just a gloomy silence. The treaty was signed. Musa returned home, put on his armor, and rode out to face the enemy. He was never to be seen again. A group within the city had similar sentiments and decided that they would fight on rather than accept surrender. The date of surrender had been agreed to, but the resistance prepared for battle instead. On January 2nd, 1492, the Granadans woke up to the sound of bells rather than the muezzin's call to prayer. The Christians were swarming into the city, taking the resistance completely unawares. Abu Abdullah, knowing what the resistance had planned, secretly brought forward the date of surrender. Earlier, he had already handed over the keys of the city to Ferdinand and Isabella at the banks of the Zenil. He had kissed the hands of the victor and handed over the keys, and then set off with whatever wealth he could carry to his new abode. While ascending the Apujaras mountains, he stopped his horse and turned back for a last glimpse of the magnificent Alhambra Palace. His chest heaved, and tears welled into his eyes. Wiping his tears, his mother reproached him. "You weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." Those words would come to signify the legacy of Boabdil in the pages of history. Until this day, the mountain pass has been named the last sigh of the Moor. For crusaders around the world, the fall of Al-Andalus avenged the defeat of Roderick, the humiliations suffered at the hands of Salahuddin, and the recent loss of Constantinople to the Ottomans in 1453. They rejoiced from Rome to London, on occasions taking the opportunity to publicly mock the Prophet Muhammad. Spain now took her campaign of persecution globally. She believed it was her destiny to subdue all parts of the globe with the gun in one hand and the Bible in the other. Christopher Columbus witnessed the ceremony of surrender. He would later himself refer to the fall of Granada as an event that gave impetus to his voyages of discovery. While Muslim rule was no more, Muslims were still abundant. When the French King Charles V came to know of this, he was quick to remark about the Muslims remaining in Spain, "And these Mussulmans? They were not driven out? Then everything is still to be done." Chapter 9. Plight of the Moriscos. With the armies of Christianity in total control of the Iberian Peninsula, the Catholic Church began a holy war using torture, fire, and sword to force Spanish Muslims to convert to Catholicism. The Church had been using such holy inquisition since the 1200s to assail the souls of pagans and heretics. This war would be more destructive to the Muslims than the military Reconquista. Many Muslims had long seen the writing on the wall. They had begun to emigrate from Al-Andalus even before the fall of Granada. However, emigration was not an option for most of the population. The majority remained, hoping that Ferdinand and Isabella would allow them freedom to practice their religion as promised. But the inquisitors had other plans. Initially, the Church invited conversion by words and gifts. But when the Muslims resisted, their tactics took a violent turn. Ferdinand appointed Cardinal Ximenes of Toledo to head an aggressive conversion campaign. The cardinal was known to have a deep-seated hatred of all things Arabic. One of his first actions in Granada was to collect as many Arabic books as possible and set them alight in the middle of the city. Severing the crucial link between the Muslims and the language of Islam was a key objective of the Inquisition. Eventually, the Muslims would be forbidden from even speaking Arabic. Cardinal Ximenes began a campaign of forced conversion to Catholicism. Scenes of Muslim girls being dragged through the streets of Granada to be forcefully baptized was too much to bear for the Muslims, who began to riot in the streets. The Christian authorities responded with lethal force. Many Muslims were imprisoned or executed in public. Ximenes did not regret his oppressive actions. Instead, he celebrated them, as he believed he was saving the lost souls of the Muslims from purgatory. For this, he was widely praised with compliments such as, "Ximenes has outdone Ferdinand and Isabella, since they conquered the soil, but he conquered the souls." In an effort to ward off the Church's campaign of oppression, Muslim towns and villages began to renounce Islam in their entirety. But such declarations did not satisfy Ferdinand. Instead, he became even bolder. Ferdinand passed an edict in 1502 that all Muslims should either embrace Christianity or leave the country. At the same time, he imposed a series of conditions that were both difficult to meet and in some cases even life-threatening. Many Muslims did not leave so they could stay with their young children and the properties they had possessed for many generations. In staying back, the Muslims played straight into the hands of Ferdinand and the Catholic Church, who thought to retain as many Muslims as possible so they could be converted into cross-bearing Catholics. However, the Christian authorities did not recognize just how profound the connection was between the Spanish Muslims and their religion. Perhaps for the first time in Islamic history, a whole community of Muslims was in a situation where they could only practice Islam inwardly and had to profess a different faith outwardly. The Muslims would publicly participate in Christian rituals. They were baptized, attended church, and even memorized some Christian prayers. However, they would wash away the signs of baptism on returning home and would rename their children with Islamic names. Male children would be circumcised in secret. Weddings would take place in churches with borrowed robes, but once indoors, marital vows would be retaken in accordance to Islam. The secret private lives of the Moriscos did not escape the attention of the Spanish authorities. 1567 saw a new edict aimed at severing ties between the Moriscos and anything even remotely related to Islam. Spoken and written Arabic was banned. The Moriscos had 3 years to learn Spanish and were forced to give up all Arabic books and translate all Arabic documents. They were to wear only the national Christian dress in public, and their women would not be allowed to veil. To stop frequent bathing and washing, public and private baths would be demolished. Children between the ages of 3 and 13 were to be placed in Christian schools and given instruction in Christianity. The Moriscos had little choice. All attempts at negotiation with the king fell on deaf ears. They did not want to live separate public and private lives. Instead, they wanted to practice their religion openly, to be able to pray, fast, make pilgrimage to Mecca, speak Arabic, and read the Koran in peace. Eventually, the Moriscos came to the conclusion that they had no choice but to take up arms to protect their right to practice their religion. An attempt by the Moriscos to revolt at Granada was intercepted by the Christians. After this event, anyone intending to rebel against the Spanish authorities took to the Alpujarra Mountains outside Granada. This was a rugged and mountainous region south of Granada, which was extremely difficult to access. From there, the revolution began to gain momentum. Moriscos from all over Granada and the greater region began to converge at the Alpujarras. Their resistance took the form of guerrilla warfare. However, the Moriscos were never a match for the might of the Spanish forces. The Spaniards went from village to village, killing and sacking, celebrating their slaughter and rape. The few Moriscos that survived were forced to bear the cross. Neither young nor old, nor woman nor child were spared. Delegations were sent to other Muslim empires, especially to the mighty Ottoman Empire of the time, but they were rejected. Only Turkish and North African mujahideen offered their services and proved worthy warriors until the end. Eventually outnumbered and outgunned, the revolution died out. The Moriscos were forced to disperse throughout the country and to take greater care in concealing their religion. They faced an even more determined and invigorated Inquisition that kept a sharper eye on anything suspicious. The Moriscos had to be extremely careful not to be caught speaking Arabic, bathing too often, possessing Arabic books, and fasting unnecessarily. Suspicion of possessing the Koran was one of the most heinous crimes. Suspects were subjected to secret arrests, trials with presumption of guilt, and forced confessions. Various barbaric means were employed equally to both men and women to extract confessions. If found guilty, the punishment ranged from light penances such as an oral testimony known as the Act of Faith to execution in public. Moriscos facing execution would be given a choice as to die a Christian or a Muslim. If they chose to die a Christian, they would be hanged. If they chose otherwise, they would be stoned and then burnt alive. Even in such overwhelmingly difficult circumstances, the Moriscos clung to Islam. They would choose to die by hanging, but would then pronounce the Islamic testimony of faith on the gallows. The Catholic state was only further infuriated by the persistence of the Muslims. Several solutions were put forward, including gathering all the Muslims in one location and massacring them. Others suggested putting the Muslims in boats and sinking them in the sea. As a result, in 1609, an edict was passed to have all Moriscos expelled. The Moriscos suffered unspeakable horrors on their outward journey. Thousands were robbed and their children kidnapped. The roads to the ports of exile were littered with dead bodies. Some figures suggest that up to 1 million Muslims were exiled. The vast majority emigrated to North Africa. In a final act of rebellion, the Muslims gave the Adhan openly and prayed in public for all to see. Murcia was the last province to be cleared of Moriscos in 1614, over 9 centuries after Tariq ibn Ziyad set foot on the Iberian Peninsula. The Catholic zealots rejoiced at the expulsion of the Muslims. Some felt it would be a matter of time before Spain reclaimed Jerusalem and destroyed the power of Islam. Yet the reality was otherwise. Muslims were essential to the economic prosperity of Spain. With the Muslims gone, the Spanish economy crashed. For centuries afterwards, the Spanish government painstakingly concealed as much of its Muslim heritage as it could from its people. But Allah had other plans. Chapter 10. Renacimiento, the Revival. 400 years after the last Muslims were exiled, Spain is now a totally different world. Granada prepares itself for a unique event, Europe's first ever conference on halal tourism. Isabella and Ferdinand must be rolling over in their graves. Spain is beginning to reconnect herself with an Islamic past that has been largely ignored, even concealed. Thousands of visitors frequent two architectural masterpieces, the Mosque of Cordoba and the glorious Alhambra Palace in Granada, the two highest-rated attractions in the country. There is a palpable feeling of awe and respect at the spectacle of a civilization that was so far advanced for its time. In Cordoba, the tourists marvel at the endless array of red and white arches suspended on columns. Most visitors, however, congregate around the mihrab, dazzled by its simple yet intricate adornments. This is where the imam would have stood, leading congregational prayers. There is also a distinct feeling of violation directed at the cathedral that lies, out of place, in the middle of this once glorious mosque. On the periphery of the mosque, there are poor attempts by the Christians to emulate Muslim craftsmanship. The Alhambra was rebuilt by the Nasrids in Granada in the 13th century as both a fort and a palace. This truly remarkable site is recognized by UNESCO in its World Heritage classification. The walls of the Alhambra are decorated with sophisticated mosaics, extending from Arabic words and passages of poetry, the most famous being Wala Ghalib Illallah, meaning there is no victory without the help of Allah. Unsurprisingly, the palace makes a powerful and lasting impression on visitors. One does not know which is the greater irony, that Isabella is buried at the Alhambra beneath the Islamic inscription, "There is none worthy of worship except Allah," or that despite centuries of trying to wipe out the memory of the Muslim rule, the two greatest attractions in Spain symbolize her Islamic heritage. One might expect that the majority of these visitors are Muslims from abroad, but they are actually local Spanish citizens rediscovering and reconnecting with 8 centuries of their own historical identity. This is not Islamic history alone, but undeniably the history of Spain and Europe. Remarkable, however, are the numerous reconversions to Islam triggered by these experiences. Sometimes entire families enter the fold after discovering that their roots lie in the Islamic faith. An action, a word, or an item passed down from generation to generation acts as a reminder of their ancestors' beliefs. The world in general is also beginning to acknowledge the significant contributions of Andalusian Muslims to science. The likes of Ibn Firnas, al-Zahrawi, and al-Majriti are now gaining their rightful prominence amongst academics and students. In the 1800s, British academic professor Thomas Arnold wrote, "Muslim Spain has written one of the brightest pages in the history of medieval Europe." Her influence had passed through Provence into other countries of Europe, bringing into birth a new poetry and a new culture. And it was from her that Christian scholars received what Greek philosophy and science they had to stimulate their mental activity up to the time of the Renaissance. The economy of Spain is floundering, for it still relies mostly on agriculture, built on the advancements made during the Muslim era, and tourism, which also relies heavily on their Islamic past. Granada hopes that Europe's first-ever Halal Tourism Conference will attract Muslims armed with cash rather than weapons. It is estimated that in 2013, $140 billion were spent by the Muslim market, approximately 13% of global travel expenditure. This is only projected to rise further. Ironically, the city that once prohibited Muslims from all that was lawful and forced them into that which was unlawful, now strives to accommodate these so-called pagans. Halal restaurants are opening up, and Spanish abattoirs are beginning to provide halal meat. Hotels are now indicating the direction of Mecca for the praying faithful. They stock copies of the Quran, which once was a grievous crime. The Reconquista has passed. It is now time for the renacimiento, or revival, of this great religion into a land whose soil still yearns for prostrations and whose mountains still echo the sounds of the Adhan.
Now that you have listened to the glorious history of Islamic Spain, you naturally yearn to visit Spain to witness firsthand the great art and architecture of the Islamic era. You desire to explore the great Mosque of Cordoba, to walk through the streets of Seville, and to admire the majestic Alhambra palaces. Islamic Legacy has partnered with Andalusian Roots to provide you with a unique opportunity to relive the lost kingdom of Al-Andalus. Andalusian Roots is a tour company like no other. The staff of Andalusian Roots will take care of you from the moment you contact them to the time they say farewell to you at the airport. The specialist tour guides are passionate, educated, eloquent, and provide an Islamic narrative that has long been suppressed by the Spanish authorities. Amongst the tour guides, they regularly have well-known English-speaking sheikhs, such as Yasir Qadhi and Abdullah Hakim Quick, delivering lectures and commentary throughout the tour to enhance your Islamic experience. All tours are supplemented with engrossing, high-quality presentations, both before and after the day's end. As you travel from city to city, the history of this great kingdom will be unraveled to you step by step. Along the way, you will meet and hear from local Spaniards who are rediscovering their Islamic heritage and perhaps pray Jummah at their local mosque. You may even witness some Spaniards convert to Islam at the local mosque. You will be traveling in 5-star coaches, and the accommodation provided caters to all your needs. The tour can be customized for small groups to suit their peculiar requirements. After listening to our audio lecture, the only way to travel to Spain is with Andalusian Roots. We guarantee that it will be an eye-opening, unique, emotional, and spiritual journey, one you will never forget. For bookings and more information, please visit www.islamic-spain.com or contact Islamic Legacy.